Hello everyone, my name's Emily and I'm going to be talking about my mental health journey. This is quite a vulnerable speech for me. I'm going to be covering some heavy topics, so if anyone needs to leave, feel free to walk out. I will not be offended. Also, I'm very nervous, so bear with me. This is my first time talking at an event like this. Okay. So who am I? I am a freelance writer and general creative person. I write about topics such as addiction, disability, mental health, books, sea swimming. This year my writing has been published in Silas magazine and Metro, which I was very excited for and very proud of. I'm also the founder of the Sober Book Club, which is an online community and book club for sober and sober curious people to meet up, chat and share their love of literature. So, as well as this, I help to support two amazing charities with which I have personal connections to. The first is Reach Charity, who I am a trustee and mentor for. Reach is a charity for people with upper limb disabilities like myself. You may have noticed I have one hand. We help to support new parents who have children born with this type of disability and support the children from birth to age 25. I help to run that activity week in the summer for the 10 to 17-year-olds, and I've also been working to set up a retreat for the 18 to 25-year-olds, and we have our first pilot program next April, which is very exciting. So, as well as this, of course, Georgia's Voice, which you're all aware of, and that's why we're here today. I became a facilitator at the beginning of this year when I started to help Stacey run the Newquay group. I already feel like I fit right in, and it's so nice to already see the potential and progress from some of our girls. One of our girls actually nominated Stacey and I to the West Country Women Awards, and I was really surprised to have made it to the semi-finals, and then even more surprised when I made it to the finals. So I'm really honoured and touched to even have been nominated, let alone to make it that far. I would like to thank Sophie and all the other inspirational leaders at Georgia's Voice, because without them, I wouldn't have been nominated, and you guys wouldn't have the help that you have. And I just think the work that they do is truly amazing. So thank you. And also, they inspired me to stand up here and tell my story, being very, very nervous. So. Okay, so I'm going to talk about depression, addiction, and suicide. Also, a bit more about Georgia's Voice first. So I came across the post on Instagram, which was this post. My friend tagged me in it because she thought that I would be a perfect candidate to help for the facilitator role. It came at the perfect time because I had just finished a level 2 counselling course, and I really wanted to use what I had learnt to help other people. I also felt really heartwarmed and emotional when I first came across the charity, because after my own battle with depression, where I was thrown around hospitals and mental health services, which felt really clinical and quite stressful, I could have really benefited from a charity like this. So naturally I felt pulled to help out. Tackling suicide, depression and other debilitating mental health is not an easy task, and I know this all too well, so it really must be emphasised that when I stumbled upon Georgia's Voice, I was really touched in a profound way. Oh, that's the wrong way. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a bit about my story. I've suffered with depression for as long as I can remember. Growing up, I always felt overcome with really big emotions, and I didn't really know how to process them. And I didn't understand them either. They came out overflowing and all-encompassing, which threw me into intense emotional pain. It started with feeling deeply misunderstood. I had to grow up with a physical difference, surrounded by people who all looked different to me. Even though I was accepted and supported by my family and at school, and obviously with the charity that I help out for now, it still weighed heavy on me. When you're born different, even if you feel super secure in yourself, you still question, why me? There are years worth of stories I could retell about my depression, like the time I phoned the police and asked them to kill me. because I wanted to die, which shouldn't be funny, but remembering it still kind of makes me smile because I genuinely believed that they had the power to do that. Or there was the time that I had the crisis team worker visit my house, and a year later I saw him on Tinder and we matched. And I asked him, and I asked him with a wink face, "Do you remember me?" Or there was the time that I drank so much that my friend had to take me to hospital because I wouldn't stop throwing up. And we drove past a school that had just been dismissed whilst I puked out of his car window, only to look up at a bunch of horrified children staring back at me. But right now I want to talk about the years from 2018 to 2020, which I remember as being my worst. So this is me during that time. The first picture is me in the Cardinham Woods car park. We were going to go out for a nice nature walk, but I was too high at the time and could not walk, so I just got out of the car and laid on the floor. And then we didn't end up going for the walk because I was in this state, so I had to get back in the car and go all the way home. The second one is me just very, very hungover, obviously too hungover to even open my eyes. And the third one is me at the train station after just coming out of hospital after my last psychosis episode, where I was still hearing voices in my head. And I had to catch the train to go back home and visit family because it was my nan's funeral. These years represent my descent into madness. At the end of 2017, I managed to escape an abusive relationship, where I was the subject of verbal, physical, and emotional abuse. Escaping this relationship, I felt relief, but the abuse didn't stop there because I began to abuse myself with alcohol and drugs. Within the space of the next year, I became heavily dependent on alcohol. I started taking drugs again after dabbling about with them whilst I was at university. My life at the time revolved around working. At the time, I was working, managing a shop on Newquay High Street, going to the pub after work, mostly alone, and then sleeping to do it all again the next day. Sometimes I would have hangovers so bad that I couldn't go into work, and one time I turned up late. I was then called in for a disciplinary meeting and was told that I would be sacked because I forgot to mark it on the timesheets, and so that was classed as gross misconduct. The reason I was late that morning is because I had been so drunk that I decided to spend the night with a married man. But not just any married man, he was also my friend's dad. And at the time, I didn't fully understand the gravity of my actions or the risks of all that was happening. I was only trying to do one thing, which was to escape the torment in my mind. After losing my job, I proceeded to spend my free time drinking and taking more drugs, and I always overdid it, staying up later than everyone else and not really knowing when to stop. A month after I lost my job, I managed to secure another one in the same field. But in the first week of work, I found out that I was pregnant. Thankfully, not with my friend's married dad. Heard a sigh of relief there. No, not with him. With someone who would then become my boyfriend. I continued to work, but then I had to take time off because I wanted to have an abortion. I didn't feel fit to be a mother at all, and I was still self-medicating with drugs, although not whilst I was pregnant. I stopped for a bit, and I think I was only having the occasional drink. I hadn't been through pregnancy or an abortion before, so this was all really new for me. I chose to have a home abortion, but the procedure went wrong, so I had to be rushed into hospital, and the rest of the tissue was removed surgically. I still remember the hospital staff asking me if I wanted to see the fetus. I said no. I went back to work after this, but continued to live a life on a diet of cocaine and MDMA. Not a good idea, don't recommend. I was having house parties at weekends where friends would come over and end up staying for days. I remember clambering over their sleeping bodies to make it to work, although I had become a complete mess and was fired a few months later for poor management. Fair enough. I fell into such a state of stress after I was fired. I didn't know how to properly grieve my abortion, and I was just horrifically depressed and still trying to self-medicate with drugs to not think about anything. The months that followed saw more overdoses and hospital visits. After my first overdose on cocaine, I decided that it was the cocaine that was the problem, and so I got rid of that. And then I overdosed on speed, and I decided it was the speed. And then the same thing happened on ketamine. I decided it was the ketamine, get rid of that. And then the same thing happened on pills, got rid of that. Each overdose caused another hospitalization. All I had left was my crushed up MDMA, and I refused to believe that I could ever overdose on it. It was a happy party drug, and there would be no downsides to continue taking it. Some of my overdoses were deliberate, some were accidental, but I went back through my life and I counted that since the age of 17, I have deliberately overdosed 15 times. Oh, bear with me. It was during this time of overdosing that I began to experience psychosis. Psychosis is a mental state where you experience different realities. So I would be hearing voices in my head, seeing things, even sometimes feeling things. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was psychosis. I just thought that these were real things that were happening. These were real people that I was talking to. Obviously, that wasn't the case. The episodes were short, but they began to get really, really scary. And so I knew that I had to start questioning my mental health, trying to seek out help and trying to stop taking drugs. A few months passed, and I managed to go 1 month sober in September 2019. And at the end of that month, I decided to celebrate by a relapse. Me and my boyfriend then split up. He was worried about my drug taking, and he used to ask my friends to check up on me to see how I was, and I thought that that was wrong of him, so I broke up with him because I didn't like that. I just wanted to be free to do what I wanted, which was to take drugs without anyone trying to police what I was doing. And it was no surprise that when I started to date someone new, he was the only person I knew who did more drugs than I did. And he mostly ignored my overdoses and obvious cries for help. He was too preoccupied with his own relationship to drugs. Of course, it wasn't all bad. Had some fun times, moments of chemically induced joy. And I thought I could keep up the lifestyle. I convinced myself that it was fun. But then I fell pregnant again, exactly a year after my first pregnancy. I was distraught. I felt utterly and completely broken. I lost so much weight from my addiction because I started forcing myself to throw up in between meals. I was way worse off than the first time I got pregnant. And I felt that there was only one thing for me to do. I had my second abortion a month later, which then triggered all those feelings of grief again. I knew at this point that I wanted to die, even though I had overdosed many times before. Sorry. Even though I'd overdosed many times before, that was the time that I felt sure. I was so ashamed of myself and the way that I was living. Sorry. But I didn't know any other way out. I didn't know how to get help, how to get sober. I didn't know that there was any help out there, or I didn't believe that I could. Okay. So I tried to overdose again, but with this time, hopefully, to an end of all my pain. I took over 1 gram of MDMA in one go. For those who are unaware, this is 10 times the recommended dose. After a while, my body began to convulse and I started throwing up. I was heaving into a bowl that my friend fetched for me, and he knew something wasn't right, so he rang an ambulance. was then escorted to hospital where I experienced probably the worst psychotic episode, the worst episode that I've ever had in my life. I was hearing voices so loud, the only thing I could do to stop them was to scream. I remember being in the hospital bed, screaming and rocking with my hands and my arm over my eyes and ears to try and block out the sounds I was hearing and the things I was seeing. It was like every bad word I had ever thought about myself being played at full volume in a ricocheting chorus. The hospital staff were looking at me as though I were completely insane, which I guess I was. But every time I looked into their eyes, I could only see terror. Time also shifted whilst I was there, and I believed that I had been there for years of my life. I believed that when I started to come sort of out of it, that I would look in the mirror and I would see an older version of myself. This instance is what many people in recovery call their rock bottom moment. And it was after this that I knew that I had no choice. I had to get sober. I felt lucky to be alive and to have made it through that experience. I desperately wanted to change my life. I realized the common denominator in all of my suffering. It wasn't the drugs. It wasn't my friends. It wasn't my boyfriend. It was me. Which was a great revelation, actually, quite a liberating one. Like, I have the power to control this, and that's what I'm going to do. Funnily enough, my darkest moments made me wonder if I can reach such lows from inflicting all this stuff on myself. What would happen if I tried to reach the highs? What would happen if I tried to be happy? Okay. So, my recovery story. My sobriety was the catalyst for my mental health improvement. After my last overdose, I became determined to never allow myself to be put in that position again. It frightened me so much that then I was overly meticulous about what I put into and how I treated my body. I never wanted to experience terror or all the stuff that happened when I overdosed, the psychosis and hearing voices. I took drugs to get myself out of the pain. I wanted to feel euphoric. I didn't want to feel horrendous. I decided it was time to start chasing some natural highs. I realized that I never actually wanted to kill myself. I only wanted to be free from pain. I was put on a waiting list for therapy, and I started telling my friends that I no longer wanted to drink. My recovery was tough, and I continued to drink for a while, and I eventually managed to give it up at the end of 2020. I spent most of the time after my hospitalizations indoors, reading and watching Netflix documentaries. I stumbled across a documentary featuring Wim Hof, where he spoke about the benefits of cold water swimming and like the natural high that you get from that. And so I was like, that's something that I think I want to do. The benefits of cold water therapy included higher levels of dopamine and lowered anxiety. After consuming so many drugs, I knew that I was experiencing a significant decrease of my joy in life without them. And the withdrawals from the drugs and the aftermath of my last psychotic episode left me highly paranoid. With the beach a 2-minute walk from my flat, I knew what I had to do. I had to go jump in the sea. The documentary proved right. I felt calmer in the sea, and the shock of the cold water was invigorating and fun. I had found my perfect medicine. And this was also the time where one of my friends reached out to me and asked me to be an ambassador for her fitness brand. So I decided to take up some exercise as well. And that really improved my health and aided in my recovery too. I then managed to see a therapist, and I started a course of cognitive behavioural therapy, which lasted 12 weeks. I'd had counselling before, and I'd enrolled in CBT before, but I'd never really finished it or engaged with it properly. But this time I did, and I got to the end of the 12 weeks. I was also reading a lot of self-help books at the time, and they also kept me to be motivated as well. It was like I had stopped my addiction to harmful substances and then suddenly became addicted to healing. It wasn't easy, though, to completely change my lifestyle. I had friends who would still ask me to come out with them, and a boyfriend who was still a big drinker and drug user at the time. I had to start creating boundaries around nights out, and I spent so much time alone that I became really lonely. I was still not working, signed off sick. So my whole focus was on my recovery and getting better, which I feel like I needed, but also that left me really alone, and I felt like I didn't have a community to support me. After 4 months of sobriety, I ended my relationship and I started coaching with a life coach who specialised in mindset, anxiety and beliefs. I discovered that I was holding on to a lot of unhelpful narratives that were keeping me stuck and unhappy. Although by the time I had reached 6 months sober, I felt happier than I had been in years. Because I had rekindled my love of reading in sobriety, I wanted to share that and find people who enjoyed that too. I founded the Sober Book Club in May 2021, thinking I would only get a few people who would want to talk about books with me. But I ended up growing my platform, and we now have over 4,800 followers on Instagram. I host the monthly meetings, create and upload the content, publish a monthly newsletter, and now I also have a team to help me keep the community alive. I not only rekindled my love for reading books, I had also rekindled my love of writing, and I started working on writing a book. My thought process going into writing the book was actually, well, if I'm going to die, I want to fill out my childhood dream of writing a book, so I'll just kill myself after I write that. Obviously, I don't want to do that anymore. And through the writing, it was like another medicine for me. So, yeah. My work with Reach Charity involves writing articles for their magazines. So the idea for the book was to take all the articles that I'd written and put them into one big book about like the advice that I give people who have one hand. And the story is called On the Other Hand. This book has been 4 years in the making. I've received 5 rejections from potential agents and publishers in that time, up until last month, where I received an email from a publisher who said that they wanted to work with me, which was really, really nice. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we had a Zoom call and she said, I really like your writing style. And I was like, me? Like, who are you talking to? But yeah, it was really nice and really, really affirming for me. So when I began to change my life, I was shocked that by doing more things aligned to what I truly wanted and living in a more healthy way seemed to ignite more positive experiences. Shocker. It took me a while to catch up and realise that this wasn't a stroke of luck. It was me putting in the effort to change the outcome of my destiny. I continued working with my life coach. I stayed away from alcohol and drugs. I kept sea swimming, getting regular exercise, following my passion, eating well and working on myself. I start my days with hope now. I no longer need chemical happiness. I don't fear getting pregnant. I want to escape my pain sometimes, but I no longer want to die. I learned that even though I started my journey alone and only I could change my destiny, that it's okay to ask for help, and I wouldn't be where I am without the support network that I had around me. I recognized the strength in other people, and that also helped me to see the strength in myself. So if you have listened to my story today and think that I am strong, that is because I am reflecting your own power back to you. As a fierce lover of words, I'd like to end my story with some words of encouragement that aided me on my journey. So these are the ones that I want to read out to you now. We are more in control than we think we are. This too shall pass. No amount of anxiety can change the future, and no amount of guilt can change the past. My world changed when I realised the common denominator in all of my suffering, me. To want different, we have to act different. And I also included this photo because it was taken when I'd come out of the ambulance and was being rushed into hospital after my first pregnancy went wrong. And I saw the rainbow and I stopped my boyfriend at the time and I was like, look, and I made him take a picture of it. So that's why I included that there. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.